Dusk over an American city, power concentrated, confident, seemingly unchallenged. Yet across the Pacific, another center of gravity intensifies, preparing its ascent. Networks of bases and alliances light the planet, mapping America's reach and limits. At sea and on parade, two militaries display strength. Rivals sharing one horizon. Beneath glowing data lines, a contest emerges: influence, technology, and will. For a brief, shining moment in history, the world seemed to have found its balance. After the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, a new era began. It was an age defined by the unmatched power of the United States. This period is often called the unipolar moment. American economic influence spread across the globe, military influence spread across the globe, cultural influence spread across the globe with little resistance. The world operated under a set of rules largely written and enforced by Washington. Peace, it was thought, was the natural state of this new order. The great power competitions that had defined the 20th century were believed to be relics of a bygone, more dangerous time. This sense of stability, however, was an illusion. While America enjoyed its position as the sole superpower, other nations were quietly undergoing profound transformations. The global system was not static. It was merely in a state of temporary equilibrium. Beneath the surface of American dominance, new powers were gathering strength. They were building their economies, modernizing their industries, learning the rules of the international game. The post-Cold War. Peace, dividend, allowed many Western nations to reduce military spending. It was predicated on the assumption that no peer competitor would emerge to challenge the established order for generations to come. This assumption would soon prove to be a historic miscalculation. The most significant of these rising powers was the People's Republic of China. Fueled by market-oriented reforms and its integration into the global economy, China experienced an economic miracle unprecedented in human history. Millions were lifted out of poverty as factories churned out goods for the world. This economic expansion was not just about prosperity, it was a strategic endeavor. China's leaders understood that true national power required more than just wealth. It required a military capable of defending its interests and projecting its influence far beyond its borders. The unipolar world was living on borrowed time, and the clock was ticking faster than anyone in the West seemed to realize. Slowly at first, and then with astonishing speed, China began to translate its economic gains into hard military power. It invested heavily in its armed forces, the People's Liberation Army. The world watched as China developed advanced technologies, built a world-class navy, and reformed its military into a modern, professional fighting force. The unipolar moment was officially over. The United States was no longer the only major player on the world stage. A new dynamic was taking shape, defined not by cooperation, but by an increasingly tense and complex competition between the established power and the rising one. The era of easy dominance had ended. The central question of our time is no longer about maintaining the old order. It is about navigating the new one. The quiet rivalry between the United States and China has grown into a direct and overt competition for global influence. The focus has shifted from managing China's rise within the existing system to preparing for a potential breakdown of that system. The possibility of a large-scale, high-intensity conflict between these two nuclear-armed giants is now a serious consideration for military planners on both sides. This preparation is not happening in the shadows. It is an all-encompassing national effort. In the United States, the strategic focus has pivoted decisively towards the Indo-Pacific. In China, the national goal of rejuvenation is explicitly tied to building a military that can fight and win wars. This new great game is being played out across multiple domains simultaneously. It is a technological arms race to develop the most advanced weapons, from hypersonic missiles to artificial intelligence. It is a logistical marathon, as both sides work to secure supply chains and position forces for a potential conflict thousands of miles from home. At the heart of this competition are the alliances that define global geopolitics. The United States is reinforcing its long-standing partnerships and forging new ones, like the AUKUS Security Pact with the United Kingdom and Australia. China, in turn, is leveraging its economic might through initiatives like the Belt and Road to build its own network of friendly states securing access to resources and strategic locations. This diplomatic maneuvering is creating new fault lines across the globe, forcing smaller nations to choose sides in a contest they would rather avoid. The economic interdependence that once promised to prevent conflict is now being viewed as a vulnerability, leading to talk of decoupling. This could disrupt global supply chains, increase the cost of living, and threaten economic stability worldwide. Understanding how the United States and China are preparing for war is therefore not an academic exercise. It is essential for grasping the profound changes reshaping our world and the growing risks to international peace and security that we all face. The story of China's modern rise begins not with weapons, but with economic policy. Following the turbulent years of the Cultural Revolution, a new leader, Deng Xiaoping, charted a radically different course in the late 1970s. His famous maxim, "Hide your strength, bide your time," became the guiding principle for a generation. Deng understood China couldn't challenge the global order until it built a powerful economic foundation. He initiated market-oriented reforms, opening the country to foreign investment and trade. This shift was monumental, unleashing productive potential and setting the stage for unprecedented growth. Reform and opening up created special economic zones along the coast, laboratories for capitalism within a communist state, attracting foreign companies with cheap labor and lax regulations. It allowed China to acquire Western technology, capital and management expertise, rapidly modernizing industries. While the world saw a benign trading partner, Beijing saw methodical accumulation for eventual global ascent. The results were staggering. 3 decades of nearly 10% annual growth. Hundreds of millions lifted out of poverty. A vast and growing middle class emerged. Prosperity improved living standards, and it solidified the CCP's legitimacy. This social contract, prosperity for political control, became the bedrock of future ambitions. Instead, China focused inward, building national power piece by piece. The economic boom was the first crucial step. It provided financial resources, the technological base, and national confidence, enabling the PLA's transformation into a modern military. The economic dragon had awakened, and it was hungry. For most of its history, China was a continental power. Its military focus was on land-based threats. Its navy was a coastal defense force. This began to change in the new millennium. Leaders saw a need to be a global power. They had growing overseas interests. They needed to protect sea lanes for trade. They needed to protect energy routes, so they pursued a blue water navy. That started one of the most ambitious shipbuilding programs in modern history. The project is still accelerating. The goal? Challenge U.S. dominance in the Western Pacific and beyond. The first major milestone was an aircraft carrier program. China acquired the partially built Soviet hull, the Varyag. It reverse-engineered and rebuilt the ship. It was commissioned as the Liaoning in 2012. It was followed by the Shandong, China's first domestically built carrier, launched in 2017. These carriers marked a fundamental shift in capability. They let the plan project air power far from its coasts. Beyond carriers, the plan has been commissioning warships at a breathtaking pace. Modern destroyers, frigates, corvettes. They come equipped with advanced sensors and sophisticated missile systems. Some years saw more Chinese naval tonnage launched than all other nations combined. But it's not just quantity, it's quality. Ships like the Type 055 destroyer are now among the world's most powerful surface combatants. In some respects, they rival American ships. The buildup has a clear geopolitical purpose centered on Taiwan and the South China Sea. China aims to build an anti-access area denial bubble. That bubble would make U.S. intervention over Taiwan incredibly risky. In the South China Sea, the plan enforces Beijing's territorial claims. It intimidates smaller neighbors, and it challenges freedom of navigation. The shift from a green water to a blue water navy is more than a military evolution. It's a direct challenge to the maritime order that has underpinned Indo-Pacific stability for decades. While the naval expansion captured global headlines, an equally profound transformation was occurring throughout the People's Liberation Army. Under President Xi Jinping, the PLA has undergone its most significant restructuring since the founding of the People's Republic. Move away from a bloated, ground-centric force designed for mass land warfare. Create a leaner, more agile, technologically advanced military. Joint operations, land, sea, air, space, cyberspace. Break down old rivalries between the services. Forge a truly integrated fighting force modeled on and designed to defeat the United States military. A core component of this modernization has been the elevation of the PLA rocket force. This branch controls China's vast arsenal of land-based conventional and nuclear missiles and is central to its military strategy. This arsenal serves as both a sword and a shield. It is the primary tool for striking key enemy assets, aircraft carriers, military bases, command centers, at the outset of a conflict. This capability is designed to cripple an adversary's ability to project power and give China an immediate and decisive advantage in any regional confrontation. Perhaps the most talked about weapons in the PLARF's inventory are its anti-ship ballistic missiles like the DF-21D and the longer-range DF-26. Dubbed carrier killers, these missiles are specifically designed to target and destroy large naval vessels, particularly United States aircraft carriers, from hundreds or even thousands of miles away. The existence of these weapons fundamentally changes the strategic landscape of the Pacific. For the first time since World War II, the United States Navy's carrier strike groups face a credible and potent threat that could deny them access to the waters around China, especially the Taiwan Strait. The development of these missile forces is a classic example of asymmetric warfare. Unable to match the United States in every conventional area, China has focused on developing assassins' mace capabilities, niche technologies that can exploit an opponent's key vulnerabilities. By investing in relatively inexpensive missiles, China can threaten extremely high-value American assets like a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier. This strategy raises the potential cost of United States intervention to an unacceptable level, creating a powerful deterrent that serves Beijing's strategic goals without necessarily having to achieve parity with the entire United States military. The missile is the great equalizer in this new era of competition. At the absolute center of the strategic competition between the United States and China lies the island of Taiwan. For the Chinese Communist Party, the reunification of Taiwan with the mainland is a sacred mission, a core component of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Beijing views Taiwan as a renegade province and has never renounced the use of force to bring it under its control. It is the single most sensitive and dangerous issue in the entire United States-China relationship, and the most likely flashpoint for a major war. For the United States and its allies, Taiwan's status is of immense strategic importance. Geographically, the island is a critical node in the First Island Chain, a series of archipelagos that stretches from Japan through the Philippines, hemming in China's coastline. Control of Taiwan would give the PLA Navy and Air Force unfettered access to the wider Pacific Ocean, breaking this containment and dramatically altering the military balance in the region. General Douglas MacArthur famously referred to Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Its continued de facto independence is crucial for defending Japan, the Philippines, and vital international shipping lanes, making its fate a top security concern for Washington. The economic dimension adds another layer of critical importance. Taiwan is a global powerhouse in the manufacturing of advanced semiconductors. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company alone produces the vast majority of the world's most advanced microchips, which are essential for everything from smartphones and computers to advanced weapon systems. A Chinese takeover of Taiwan would give Beijing a stranglehold over this indispensable technology, creating a catastrophic dependency for the rest of the world, including the United States military. The Silicon Shield, as it is sometimes called, makes Taiwan's security a matter of global economic stability and technological leadership. Because of these high stakes, both sides are actively preparing for a potential conflict. China conducts increasingly large and complex military exercises around the island, simulating a full-scale invasion, blockades, and amphibious assaults. In response, the United States has increased arms sales to Taiwan to bolster its self-defense, has stepped up its own military presence, and freedom of navigation operations in the region. The situation is a precarious standoff, where any miscalculation could trigger a devastating war with global consequences. The modern battlefield extends far beyond land, sea, and air. China has recognized that future wars will be won or lost in the digital cyberspace and celestial domains of outer space. Consequently, it has invested massively to build formidable capabilities in both areas, viewing them as critical arenas for achieving an asymmetric advantage over the United States. In 2015, President Xi Jinping created the PLA Strategic Support Force, consolidating space, cyber, and electronic warfare capabilities. In cyberspace, China has become one of the world's most active and sophisticated actors. Its cyber forces engage in a wide spectrum of activities, from large-scale intellectual property theft to espionage, targeting government and military networks. This persistent campaign of cyber espionage allows China to steal sensitive military technology, effectively subsidizing its own research and development and closing the technological gap with the West at a fraction of the cost. Beyond espionage, China is also developing its offensive cyber capabilities, honing the ability to disrupt or disable an adversary's critical infrastructure, like power grids, financial systems, and military command and control networks at the outset of a conflict. Simultaneously, China has pursued an aggressive space program with clear dual-use, military-civilian applications. It has rapidly developed its own satellite navigation system, Beidou, as an alternative to the American-owned Global Positioning System, ensuring its military can navigate and target its weapons without relying on a foreign-controlled system. Furthermore, China has deployed a vast constellation of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites. This network gives the PLA the ability to monitor United States military movements across the globe in near real time, a crucial capability for targeting forces like aircraft carriers far out at sea. Most concerning for military planners, however, is China's development of counter-space weapons. It has successfully tested direct-ascent anti-satellite missiles capable of destroying satellites in low Earth orbit, as demonstrated in a 2007 test that created a massive field of space debris. It is also developing other co-orbital killer satellites, directed energy weapons, and jammers designed to disable or destroy an adversary's space assets. As the United States military is heavily dependent on its space-based systems for communication, navigation, and intelligence, China's ability to threaten these assets represents a critical vulnerability and a key element of its strategy to paralyze American forces in a future war. China's grand strategy is not limited to military hardware. It masterfully wields economic power as a primary tool of statecraft. The most ambitious expression of this is the Belt and Road Initiative, a colossal global infrastructure development project launched in 2013. Often described as a modern Silk Road, the BRI involves China financing and building roads, ports, railways, and power plants across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Strategically, however, it allows Beijing to expand its political influence, create economic dependencies, and secure access to vital resources and strategic locations around the world. Many of these ports have dual-use potential, meaning they could be used to support naval operations in the future, providing logistical hubs for the plan far from Chinese shores. This string-of-pearls strategy gives China's military a growing global footprint. By becoming the primary economic partner and creditor for many developing nations, Beijing also gains significant leverage in international forums like the United Nations, building a coalition of states that are more likely to align with its interests. This weaponization of economic interdependence has not gone unnoticed in Washington. For decades, the prevailing wisdom was that deep economic ties with China would lead to political liberalization. That assumption has been proven false. This has led to a major policy shift in the United States towards de-risking or decoupling key sectors of its economy from China, particularly in areas critical to national security, such as semiconductors, rare earth minerals, and pharmaceuticals. This move towards economic decoupling is a monumental and risky endeavor. The global economy is deeply intertwined, and untangling these complex supply chains is a difficult and costly process that could lead to significant economic disruption, inflation, and instability for everyone. However, from a strategic perspective, U.S. policymakers see it as a necessary step to reduce critical vulnerabilities and prevent China from being able to coerce the United States by threatening to cut off essential goods during a crisis or conflict. The economic front is now as much a part of the U.S.-China competition as the military one. As China's military and economic power grew, it became increasingly clear in Washington that the strategic landscape had fundamentally changed. The post-9/11 focus on counter-terrorism and conflicts in the Middle East had diverted American attention and resources for nearly 2 decades. Recognizing this growing challenge, the United States initiated a major strategic reorientation. First announced by the Obama administration as the pivot to Asia, and later refined by subsequent administrations as the Indo-Pacific strategy, this shift marked a formal acknowledgement that the primary theater of great power competition in the 21st century would be the vast expanse of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The core idea was to shift the majority of U.S. naval and air assets to the Indo-Pacific region, reinforcing America's presence and reassuring its allies. This meant moving advanced warships, stealth aircraft, and surveillance platforms to bases in places like Japan, South Korea, and Guam. The message to Beijing was unambiguous: the United States was back, and it intended to remain the preeminent military power in the region. However, the pivot was not simply about moving military hardware around the map. It also entailed a fundamental rethinking of how the U.S. military would operate in a contested environment. China's long-range missile forces rendered this approach obsolete and dangerous. In response, military planners began developing new operational concepts like distributed maritime operations and agile combat employment. These strategies emphasized dispersing smaller, more mobile units across a wider area, making them harder for an adversary to target and destroy, thereby increasing their survivability and resilience in a high-intensity conflict. The United States is actively working to counter China's ability to create a no-go zone for American forces. This involves developing new long-range weapons, hardening forward bases, and enhancing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance networks to see deep inside the A2AD bubble. The era of easy dominance is over, replaced by an era of intense, dynamic competition. The United States' greatest strategic asset is not a particular weapon system but its extensive network of alliances and partnerships. Unlike China, which has few formal military allies, the U.S. has a deep and long-standing system of security treaties that form the bedrock of its global influence and power projection capabilities. In the Indo-Pacific, this includes formal defense pacts with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia. Recognizing it cannot confront the China challenge alone, Washington has made strengthening these relationships a central pillar of its Indo-Pacific strategy. The U.S. is increasing the frequency and complexity of joint military exercises, like anti-submarine warfare with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, or amphibious landing drills with the Philippine Marines. These exercises enhance interoperability, ensuring that allied forces can fight together seamlessly in a crisis. They also signal collective resolve, showing China an attack on one could draw many. Integrated deterrence aims to create a web of security relationships so strong it dissuades Beijing from using force. Beyond traditional allies, the U.S. is cultivating flexible security partnerships. A key example is the Quad, a strategic dialogue between the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan. The Quad has become a platform for policy and security coordination. Its activities include maritime security initiatives, cooperation on critical and emerging technologies, and vaccine diplomacy. The goal is a latticework of interlocking security arrangements across the Indo-Pacific. By offering options, formal alliances, informal dialogues, ad hoc collaborations, the U.S. can build a broader and more inclusive coalition. This network effect complicates China's strategic calculations. In this new great game, the strength of one's friends is decisive, and the U.S. is playing to its traditional strengths. Among the various initiatives to bolster its strategic position, none sent a clearer or more powerful message than the announcement of AUKUS in September 2021. This trilateral security pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States marked a historic deepening of ties between three of the world's oldest allies. The centerpiece of the agreement, and its most striking element, was the commitment by the U.S. and UK to share highly sensitive nuclear submarine propulsion technology with Australia. This was a monumental decision, as the United States had only ever shared this technology once before, with the United Kingdom over 60 years ago. It signaled an unprecedented level of trust and a shared assessment of the growing threat in the Indo-Pacific. Providing Australia with a fleet of conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarines will dramatically enhance the collective military capability of the Allies in the region. Unlike conventional diesel-electric submarines, which must surface or snorkel frequently to recharge their batteries, SSNs can remain submerged for months at a time, traveling faster and farther with a much lower acoustic signature. This endurance and stealth make them ideal platforms for intelligence gathering, surveillance, and strike missions deep inside contested waters. An Australian SSN fleet, operating in concert with US and British forces, presents a formidable new challenge to the People's Liberation Army Navy. Beyond the submarine component, AUKUS is also a vehicle for collaboration on a range of other advanced military capabilities. The pact includes provisions for joint development and sharing of technologies in areas like artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, quantum computing, and hypersonic weapons. This technological cooperation is designed to ensure that the three allies maintain a collective qualitative edge over potential adversaries. By pooling their research and development resources and industrial bases, the AUKUS partners aim to accelerate the fielding of next-generation defense systems, creating a powerful synergy that none could achieve alone. The announcement of AUKUS was met with fierce condemnation from Beijing, which saw the pact as a dangerous escalation and a manifestation of a Cold War mentality. AUKUS is not a short-term plan. It is a multi-decade endeavor that will fundamentally reshape the military balance in the Indo-Pacific. It represents a long-term bet on the power of trusted alliances and technological superiority as the cornerstones of deterrence in the 21st century, firmly locking Australia, the UK, and the US into a shared strategic future. In the air domain, this modernization is exemplified by the F-35 Lightning II, a fifth-generation stealth fighter designed to penetrate sophisticated air defenses and act as a flying sensor and data node for the entire force. Alongside the F-35, the U.S. Air Force is developing the B-21 Raider, a new long-range stealth bomber capable of holding any target on the planet at risk. These platforms are complemented by investments in a new generation of unmanned systems, or collaborative combat aircraft, designed to fly alongside manned fighters, acting as decoys, sensors, or weapons platforms to multiply pilot effectiveness and overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer mass. At sea, the U.S. Navy is pursuing a more distributed and lethal fleet architecture. Key platforms include the Virginia-class submarines, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and the new Constellation-class frigate. The fleet is increasing offensive firepower, equipping ships and submarines with new anti-ship missiles and long-range land attack missiles. There is a major push toward unmanned surface and underwater vessels, which can perform dangerous missions like mine clearing or surveillance, without risking sailors' lives, and be produced in greater numbers to augment the manned fleet. On land, the U.S. Army and Marine Corps are undergoing a significant transformation. The Army is developing a new suite of long-range precision fires, including ground-launched hypersonic weapons and extended-range cannons, designed to strike enemy ships, air defenses, and command centers from hundreds of miles away. The Marine Corps is restructuring into a lighter, more mobile force, optimized for island-hopping campaigns in the Pacific. Under its Force Design 2030 concept, the Marines are divesting heavy tanks in favor of small, dispersed units armed with anti-ship missiles designed to seize and control key maritime terrain within China's weapons engagement zone. One of the most urgent and high-stakes dimensions of the new technological arms race is the pursuit of hypersonic weapons. These are missiles that can travel at speeds greater than Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound, and are highly maneuverable in flight. This combination of extreme speed and unpredictable trajectory makes them incredibly difficult for existing missile defense systems to track and intercept. The nation that can master and deploy these weapons at scale will gain a significant strategic advantage, holding an adversary's high-value, time-sensitive targets at risk with little to no warning. For a period, the United States found itself lagging behind both China and Russia in this critical field. China, in particular, has made hypersonic weapons a national priority and has achieved considerable success. In 2021, it reportedly tested a fractional orbital bombardment system armed with a hypersonic glide vehicle, a weapon that could theoretically fly around the globe before re-entering the atmosphere to strike from an unexpected direction. China has also fielded operational hypersonic systems like the DF-17, a medium-range ballistic missile tipped with a hypersonic glide vehicle. The deployment of these weapons puts U.S. military bases in the region and aircraft carrier strike groups under a far more potent threat, compressing decision-making timelines for commanders down to mere minutes. Spurred by these developments, the United States is now engaged in a frantic catch-up effort, pouring billions into hypersonic R&D across all branches of the military. The Army is developing the long-range hypersonic weapon. The Navy is working on the conventional prompt strike program. The Air Force is pursuing air-launched hypersonic cruise missiles. Beyond defense, the U.S. is racing to develop defenses against hypersonic attack. This is an immense technological challenge requiring a new generation of sensors and interceptors. The Space Development Agency is building a low Earth orbit satellite constellation to provide a hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor layer, capable of detecting and tracking these dim, fast-moving threats from launch. The Missile Defense Agency is developing new interceptor concepts like the glide phase interceptor, designed to engage hypersonic weapons during their more vulnerable mid-course flight phase. The race for hypersonic superiority is on, and its outcome could define the future of warfare. The U.S. strategic response extends beyond forward-deployed forces. It also involves a critical effort to harden the homeland and protect vital infrastructure. American society depends on complex, interconnected digital networks and space-based assets, making the country uniquely vulnerable. Chinese military strategists have written about targeting these vulnerabilities to sow chaos and cripple America's ability to project power. The United States has elevated cyber and space defense to a national security imperative. Recognizing the first shots of a future war may not be missiles, but malicious code or anti-satellite weapons. U.S. Cyber Command has adopted a proactive strategy known as Defend Forward, actively hunting and countering adversary cyber threats on foreign networks, stopping threats before they reach U.S. systems. The goals: disrupt enemy operations, gather intelligence on their tools and tactics, and impose costs to deter future attacks. A whole-of-government effort is improving cybersecurity for critical sectors, like the energy grid, financial systems, and transportation networks. In space, the 2019 establishment of the U.S. Space Force recognized space as a war-fighting domain, on par with land, sea, and air. The Space Force's mission: protect U.S. and allied interests in space, build a more resilient space architecture, deploying satellites in different orbits, adding redundancy, making them more maneuverable and better defended, improve space domain awareness, track and characterize all objects in orbit, from friendly satellites to adversary threats and space debris. The Space Force is also developing offensive capabilities, largely classified, to deter aggression by holding adversary space assets at risk. The goal: keep space a reliable enabler of U.S. military power, and prevent any adversary from gaining a decisive advantage in this critical domain. A potential conflict with China in the Indo-Pacific presents the United States with one of the most daunting logistical challenges it has ever faced. The vast distances of the Pacific Ocean create what military planners call the tyranny of distance. Any sustained, high-intensity conflict would require moving and supporting immense quantities of personnel, equipment, fuel, ammunition, and supplies across thousands of miles of ocean, all while under constant threat of attack from long-range missiles, submarines, and aircraft. Winning the war is not just about having superior weapons, it is about getting those weapons to the fight and keeping them supplied. Logistics, often overlooked, would be the decisive factor. To address this challenge, the U.S. military is heavily investing in contested logistics, moving away from large, predictable supply chains into a few major ports and airfields, which would be easy targets for Chinese missiles. Instead, the focus is on a resilient, distributed, agile logistics network, pre-positioning more supplies and munitions at smaller dispersed locations throughout the region, hardening existing logistics infrastructure, and new ways to move supplies, reinforcing runways, reinforcing port facilities, new platforms, long-range unmanned cargo drones, more survivable, smaller transport ships, working closely with allies like Japan and Australia, allied naval and air forces helping to protect vital sea and air lanes. The challenge is immense, as a war in the Pacific would consume munitions and supplies at a rate not seen since World War II. The U.S. industrial base would be strained to its limits. No matter how advanced the fighter jets or the warships, they are useless without fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. In the Indo-Pacific, logistics is not just part of the strategy. It is, the strategy. A new industrial revolution is underway, one driven by artificial intelligence, AI, and it is poised to change the character of warfare more profoundly than the invention of gunpowder or nuclear weapons. The integration of AI into military systems is at the heart of the technological arms race between the United States and China. Both nations are convinced that leadership in AI will confer a decisive military advantage, and they are investing billions of dollars to develop AI-powered systems for everything from intelligence analysis and logistical planning to autonomous weapons that can hunt and kill without direct human control. This race for AI supremacy is pushing the world toward a new era of algorithmic warfare, with terrifying and unpredictable consequences. In a future conflict, the side with the superior AI will be able to analyze vast streams of data from sensors on satellites, drones, and soldiers to identify targets, detect threats, and execute complex operations at machine speed. This creates a phenomenon known as hyperwar, where the pace of battle accelerates beyond human comprehension and control. Military command and control could shift from human operators to AI algorithms, which would make life-or-death decisions in microseconds, creating a battlefield that is faster, more lethal, and far more chaotic than anything seen before. The most controversial and ethically fraught area of military AI is the development of lethal autonomous weapon systems, LAWs, often referred to as killer robots. These are weapons that can independently search for, identify, target, and kill human beings without a human in the loop. Proponents argue that such systems could be more precise and less prone to emotional error than human soldiers, potentially reducing civilian casualties. However, critics warn of a dystopian future, where unaccountable machines make the decision to take human life. The prospect of delegating the act of killing to an algorithm crosses a moral and ethical red line for many, raising profound questions about accountability and the very nature of human control over violence. Both the United States and China are publicly hesitant to commit to a ban on autonomous weapons, each fearing the other will gain a decisive advantage by developing them in secret. This dynamic creates a classic security dilemma, where the fear of being left behind compels both sides to race forward into a technological territory that neither fully understands, potentially unleashing a ghost in the machine that cannot be controlled. The proliferation and rapid advancement of unmanned systems, or drones, have already transformed modern warfare. From high-altitude surveillance drones to small, commercially available quadcopters used for reconnaissance and even dropping grenades in Ukraine, drones have democratized air power. The United States and China are at the forefront, moving beyond single, remotely piloted aircraft toward a future defined by autonomous swarms. The U.S. pioneered large armed drones like the Predator and Reaper, now focusing on programs like the Air Force's Collaborative Combat Aircraft, CCA. The vision: manned fighters like the F-35 act as quarterbacks, commanding semi-autonomous unmanned wingmen. CCAs could fly ahead to scout, jam enemy radar, act as decoys, launch their own weapons, all while keeping the human pilot at a safer distance. The loyal wingman increases mass and effectiveness of air power, at lower cost and with less risk to human life, creating a complex, multi-layered threat hard to counter. China has become a world leader in drone manufacturing, developing advanced military drones, high-altitude surveillance platforms comparable to Global Hawk, stealthy flying wing combat drones like the GJ-11. China exports armed drones to the Middle East and to Africa, gaining operational data and expanding geopolitical influence. Chinese researchers have shown advanced swarm capabilities, successfully testing swarms of dozens and of hundreds. Drone swarms represent a paradigm shift. Hundreds or even thousands of small, cheap, AI-enabled drones could overwhelm sophisticated air defenses through sheer numbers. A swarm could attack an aircraft carrier, a swarm could attack a military base, a swarm could attack a column of tanks. This is a daunting defensive challenge. Traditional missile defenses aren't designed for this scale and aren't cost-effective. The race is on to develop offensive swarm capabilities and to build countermeasures, high-powered microwaves, lasers, and electronic warfare systems to defeat a swarm attack. The most defining characteristic of the current US-China competition is that much of it takes place in the gray zone. This is the ambiguous space between routine statecraft and open warfare, where actions are coercive and fall just short of a clear act of war. China has become a master of operating in this gray zone, using tactics to gradually change the status quo in its favor, slice by slice. A prime example is China's use of its Coast Guard and maritime militia in the South China Sea. Instead of gray-hulled Navy ships, China uses white-hulled Coast Guard vessels and a vast fleet of ordinary fishing boats. They harass and intimidate claimant nations, the Philippines and Vietnam. These forces ram ships, use water cannons, and swarm disputed reefs while keeping plausible deniability. Cyber attacks, information campaigns, and economic coercion are also classic gray zone tools. They create ambiguity about the perpetrator, intent, and the appropriate response. These actions are designed to paralyze democratic decision-making, which is often constrained by legal and political processes. The danger is normalization of aggression and increased risk of miscalculation. Each assertive action that goes unanswered emboldens the aggressor, It creates constant friction that can escalate into crisis. A collision between a Chinese maritime militia vessel and a U.S. Navy warship could quickly spiral out of control. The gray zone is winning without fighting, but it undermines international norms and tests an adversary's patience, bringing the world closer to hot war, one deniable step at a time. The consequences of this great power competition extend far beyond military planners and government officials, profoundly impacting the daily lives of civilians across the globe. The era of hyperglobalization, which brought decades of cheaper goods and interconnected economies, is now giving way to an era of strategic decoupling and de-risking. As the United States and its allies seek to untangle their supply chains from China, the global economy faces the prospect of fragmentation. This process will inevitably be disruptive, likely leading to higher costs, increased inflation, and economic uncertainty for businesses and consumers worldwide. The peace dividend that followed the Cold War, allowing governments to invest in social programs rather than massive defense budgets, is rapidly shrinking. Both the US and China are pouring trillions of dollars into their militaries, diverting vast resources that could otherwise be spent on healthcare, education, or climate change. For smaller nations caught in the middle of this rivalry, the pressure to choose sides and increase their own military spending is immense, creating a cycle of regional arms races that further drains national budgets and heightens tensions. Global security, once taken for granted in many parts of the world, is in decline. The constant friction in the gray zone, the aggressive military posturing around Taiwan, and the normalization of coercive economic practices create a pervasive sense of instability. The risk of proxy conflicts, where the US and China back opposing sides in regional disputes, grows daily. Such conflicts can devastate local populations and create refugee crises with far-reaching consequences, all while escalating the danger of a direct confrontation between the great powers themselves. Ultimately, the most profound impact is on our shared future. The intense focus on strategic competition threatens to overshadow the urgent need for global cooperation on existential challenges, like pandemics, climate change, and nuclear proliferation. The rivalry between the United States and China is not just a contest for influence, it is a force that is actively reshaping the prospects for peace, prosperity, and human progress for generations to come, often in ways we are only beginning to understand. Navigating this dangerous new era requires a clear-eyed understanding of the stakes. The first and most crucial takeaway is the value of awareness. An informed public is the bedrock of a sound and stable foreign policy in any democracy. Only through a broad and deep public debate can we hope to guide our leaders toward policies that manage this competition responsibly, avoiding the twin dangers of appeasement and reckless escalation. This awareness must be coupled with a renewed commitment to skilled, persistent diplomacy. This requires maintaining open lines of communication at all levels, from military leaders to heads of state, to reduce the risk of miscalculation during a crisis. It also means actively seeking areas of cooperation where interests align, such as on climate change or global health, to build guardrails and ensure that the entire relationship is not defined solely by confrontation. At the same time, we must recognize that diplomacy is most effective when backed by credible strength. Preparedness, both military and economic, is a vital component of a strategy aimed at preserving peace. It is the strength of our alliances, the resilience of our supply chains, and the credibility of our military deterrent that create the space for diplomacy to succeed. This is not a contradiction, it is the fundamental paradox of deterrence. To avoid war, one must be prepared for it, signaling to a potential adversary that the costs of aggression would be unacceptably high. In the end, the future is not preordained. Thucydides' trap, the idea that a rising power will inevitably clash with a ruling one, is a powerful historical pattern, but it is not an iron law. Human agency matters. The choices made by leaders and citizens in Washington, Beijing, and capitals around the world will determine whether the 21st century is defined by a catastrophic conflict or by a managed, if tense, competition. Wars don't begin with explosions. They begin with silence and ignorance. The challenge of our time is to replace that silence with dialogue and that ignorance with understanding, and to choose carefully a path that preserves peace.